So the petition worked. Everyone who owns Warhammer 3 can now play Immortal Empires. And only a year since the game was released, and then almost immediately faceplanted itself to near oblivion because it was rushed out 3/4 finished, with too many monsters, not enough well-established good guy factions, and most of the vaunted multiplayer modes seeing more crashes per session than you'd see in the average NASCAR season. And a mere 6 months after the release of Immortal Empires, but really only 3 months since that became a mode that's actually worth playing. I'm being snarky here because this past year has been a long and painful one to be a Total War player and content creator. News and content droughts are a channel killer, and trying to make gameplay guides for a game that wasn't really in a release state is a Sisyphean task. The gap between Warhammer 3's release and that of the first major patch for Immortal Empires was the longest break I've had from playing Total War since I first started with the series more than 2 decades ago. Suffice to say that Immortal Empires is now enough fun that I'm actually playing it, and my channel's active again, so I'm very happy that lots of other people are now able to join in on the big world map, and all credit to Legend of Total War for driving this change forward, because I do not believe for 1 second that it was going to come without his petition and the community support that followed. I do take issue with something though. People are using a term, barrier to entry, and saying that it's now gone. But is it really gone? Personally, I believe that it's been lowered, but it's not entirely gone, and I'm going to explain why and what CA should do to get rid of it. Beyond bugs and some questionable design choices, one of Warhammer 3's biggest issues at launch was the cast of playable characters. For established fans of the series, it was great to finally get characters like Nakari, Kara's Fateweaver, Kugath Plaguefather, Scarbrand and Tsarina Katrin, as well as Greasus Goldtooth and Scrag the Slaughterer for the pre-order bros, and the Builder Demon faction that CA's trailer team completely ruined for me with that awful Daniel meme that killed my immersion stone dead before I could even try him. Something should immediately stand out there. First, I've left out a few characters, and secondly, that's a very monster-heavy lineup. The reason why I left out Kastaltin, Miao Ying and Zhao Ming is because they're basically original characters, and let's be honest, fun though all those newbies are to play as, the established lore characters always have a broader appeal. More important though is just how many straight-up evil and monstrous characters the game launched with. Considering that the likes of the Empire, Dwarfs and High Elves are generally the most popular choices even with long-time players, it's clear that a great many people favour the relatable human side of the game, taking a stand against the monsters rather than being them. With this in mind, a 7-4 monster to human-ish starting factions is not a great ratio if you want to attract and retain an audience. Having 3 of the 4 human/dragon humans be basically new characters rather than fully established lore ones doesn't help either when you want to entice as many Warhammer fans as possible. So, Immortal Empires for everyone? Good. Limited character pool? Not so good. Well, that's easily solved, right? Just buy the other games and the DLCs. Yeah, well, that's where the barrier comes into play. These are the UK prices for Total War Warhammer and Warhammer 2 on Steam, Game Pass and Epic Game Store. Total War Warhammer released in 2016 and 2 came out in 2017. This means they're almost 7 and 6 years old respectively now, yet Creative Assembly are still charging full price for them as a matter of course. Not only that, but with the advent of Immortal Empires, these games are basically just DLC packs. Sure, the characters on offer within them are some of the most popular in Warhammer, but because they're base game characters too, they're almost all massively behind the power curve and in desperate need of reworks. So full game prices for 2 very outdated DLC packs with big names in them. It just feels like CA aren't seeing the wood for the trees. These games should have dropped in price long ago, and not in a temporary enjoy our Total War sale kind of way, but rather a permanent new game price way. The only reasonable explanation for why this hasn't happened is surely that CA know that they have the most popular Warhammer characters and factions available locked behind a paywall. This is also, though, in turn, a major reason why Warhammer 3 and Immortal Empires have not seen as much of a resurgence in player base as it clearly could have, based upon the Steam stats from launch until today. If you factor in the 3 base games and every Lord and Race pack for the series, you're looking at £300 if you buy via the outlets of Steam and Epic, with a cost reduction if you're on Game Pass because you don't have to buy Warhammer 3 on there. For now, it could be removed from Game Pass at some point. That's a lot of money for a single game, which is what Immortal Empires really is, albeit one with a lot of content. Especially bearing in mind that plenty of that content is outdated and in need of drastic reworking. And sure, you can go online and find keys to pay for that more cheaply from third-party sites, but a great many people, especially parents and grandparents, are not aware of that, and so find themselves overpaying. And hell, even if you do know about the key shops, you have to find one that matches your region. Add on that it's noticeably harder to find legit keys for Game Pass and Epic than it is for Steam, and it's clear that for many people, getting the most out of Immortal Empires is going to involve spending a lot of money, which, if not an outright barrier to entry, is certainly a barrier to sticking with the game, especially if those limited starting factions that you get now do not wow you, and they certainly didn't wow me as a long-time fan. I'm not saying that CA need to change their pricing policy for new or recent releases or DLCs. But with Warhammer 1 and 2 now being essentially DLC packs for Warhammer 3 and 6 and 7 year old content, to charge just £10 less for each of them than the latest game costs individually is scandalous. Speaking as someone who bought both games and every DLC bar 2 that I was given for the first 2 parts of the series, I say bring the prices for the old content down and let the newcomers really join in the war for the Warhammer world. And speaking as someone who understands finance and human nature, I say that CA need to recognise the opportunity that has opened up with the release of Immortal Empires and realise that £80 for 2 glorified DLC packs is a lot of money in the present financial climate. And by setting the bar so high, they're actually deterring a lot of players from making that purchase. Hence there's only been a gain of a third on Steam's low December player base since Immortal Empires was open to all Warhammer 3 players, and we're still down a colossal 130,000 since the launch day figures. Taking Warhammer 1 and 2 from being relatively big purchases down to something like £20 each would turn it into a viable impulse buy that can reignite a player's interest in the whole series and lead to more purchases in the long term. And bear in mind, Warhammers 1 and 2 are already both massive financial successes for CA, so we're talking about adding further success rather than diminishing it. Getting Immortal Empires open for all was a battle won, but the war goes on. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. Let me know what you think of Immortal Empires and the pricing of the old content down in the comment section. If you liked this video or found it interesting, I'd appreciate you giving me some of the old algorithm steroids with a like and a click of the subscription button. But either way, I hope to see you in the next video.